So we had been going through Revelation, well, we're the intro to Revelation 20, where we've been talking about this millennial reign, this time where Jesus is going to reign over the world, where he's going to essentially bring peace to the world after removing the Antichrist, after removing the false prophet, after casting them down into the lake of fire. And then we're going to see that the devil, essentially called the dragon, he's going to be imprisoned for 1,000 years, where he can no longer deceive the nations. Now, we talked last time about, go ahead.
About all the other demons.
So what about all the other demons?
I mean, Satan's cast into them.
Mhm.
I mean, he's turned to them again. I mean,
Sure, and I believe that all of those that worked with him also were worshiping and living under the Antichrist, right?
Yeah.
They were, because remember, the Bible talks about those 10 kingdoms, but it also talks about they mingling themselves with the sons of men. I believe it's a connection of all these fallen angels and these humans and these human kingdoms into this false non-working kingdom. And when Jesus comes down, he casts both their leaders and those that worshiped him into the lake of fire, and their smoke ascends forever, right? So we're going to see that all of those that worked, including the fallen angels and those that took the mark of the beast, are destroyed at the second coming. Okay?
Okay, but you said he's in the bottomless, he's not in the.
We're talking about Satan himself.
Yeah.
Satan himself, as we're going to see here, is put into this, imprisoned into the abyss or the bottomless pit for 1,000 years, whereas the others are not released with him. Okay? As far as we know, it's only Satan. That's all the Bible tells us, is put into this bottomless pit. And we'll read that in the first couple of verses of chapter 20.
Okay, but you're saying, so the other evil beings are still around?
No.
They're not.
They are cast into the lake of fire. Okay, so we'll look back at it if you want. But essentially it says those who worship the Antichrist, right? Those who took the mark of the beast, they were cast into the lake burning with fire, and their smoke ascendeth forever. And we see that these two, the leaders of them, the Antichrist and the false prophet, are joined with them. Only Satan is held to a different place, and we're going to see why here as we read this chapter. So when the millennial reign comes, we were talking a little bit about it in some of the Old Testament prophecies about it. But when the millennial reign comes, when Jesus is ruling and reigning on the earth, nature itself will not behave as if it's under the curse anymore. The curse will be lifted, right? It will be a time of peace with nature and life and prosperity for all living things, and especially all humans. Jesus is going to reign everywhere, and even the wild animals, which, remember, during the tribulation, their goal was to kill anyone they could, to destroy anyone they could. It's going to be a total flip when Jesus comes to reign. In Isaiah chapter 11, I'm going to read a few verses from 1 to 9 here. It says, "And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch," again, that branch always means the Nazarene. It's the same root word as Nazarite or Nazarene. "And a branch shall grow out of his roots, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord." This is Isaiah 11. "And shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked." So just to pause real quick, whenever this root of Jesse, this Jesus Christ, who comes down to rule, he's not just going to go based on what it appears to be, right? You think, oh, well, I got away with it because I look like I did everything right. And it's not going to go just by somebody accusing you. Every one of his judgments will be righteous according to what the truth is, because that's what he does. And he will slay the wicked, again, with the sword of his mouth, with the breath of his lips. And then it says in verse 5, "And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid." That's a goat. "And the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. And the cow and the bear shall feed, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. And the sucking child shall play on the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the cockatrice's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. All the wild animals are all of a sudden the same way that Adam would have seen them. As these, what's that?
I said friendly.
Friendly, right? I mean, imagine a zoo at that time. You wouldn't need enclosures, right? You could just walk around to everything. There's no venomous creatures, nothing that wants to kill you, destroy you, eat you. All of these creatures are going to be subject to man, just as God designed it, right? They were to rule the earth, to rule over all the creatures, to subdue the earth. They messed that up. Jesus fixes it, right? He restores it. Then it says in Isaiah 65, verse 17 down to 25, he says, "For behold, I create a new heavens and a new earth. The former shall not be remembered, nor come into mind. But be ye glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem a rejoicing, and her people a joy." Is that true today? Not yet. "And I will rejoice in Jerusalem and joy in my people. And the voice of weeping shall be no more heard in her, nor the voice of crying." Is that true today? Clearly not. We look forward to the day where there's no more crying there. But right now there's a lot of crying. It says, "There shall be no more thence an infant of days." No baby's going to die after a few days. "Nor an old man that has not filled his days. For the child shall die 100 years old. But the sinner, being 100 years old, shall be accursed. And they shall build houses and inhabit them. And they shall plant vineyards and eat fruit of them. They shall not build and another inhabit, nor they shall not plant and another eat. For as the days of a tree are the days of my people, and mine elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall not labor in vain, nor bring forth for trouble. For they are the seed of the blessed of the Lord, and their offspring with them. And it shall come to pass that before they call," think about this, before you even know that you need him, before they call, I will answer. "And while they are yet speaking, I will hear." How could that be? Well, what if he's right there with them, right? "The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock, and dust shall be the serpent's meat. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my mountain, my holy mountain, saith the Lord." Think about this, guys. This is not the new heaven and new earth of eternity. This is the restored heaven and earth here. Do you know what I find really interesting about this? Is all of these curses have been lifted, except one. Did you catch it there in that passage?
The death is, people are still dying.
Well, death is still there to some degree, right? And he's saying that children, whatever, there's something else in there. One other one. Remember the curse of the serpent? "Dust you shall eat all the days of your life." Notice that the serpent, that was never lifted. Go ahead, sir.
So you think this time period that Isaiah's talking about here is the Millennium Kingdom?
Yes, so the millennial kingdom, and in particular, the reason I believe that is there's another new heavens and new earth spoken of in Isaiah that's very different. But in this particular new heavens and new earth, people are planting and raising and building houses and having children and their children's children. And we know from what Jesus tells us in the New Testament, when it comes to eternity, we aren't having more children. We aren't procreating, right? We're not being given in marriage.
And there are still people that die.
And there are still people that die. So that again is an evidence that this is not speaking of eternity yet in regards to heaven as we think of it, right? The new heavens and the new earth there. So here, all this is going to happen into a world that's going to look like a pre-flood world, right? A pre-flood world, so a restored world where Satan is not deceiving because he's going to be removed. So death, like we said, is still going to occur, but it's going to be an unnatural occurrence. It's going to be a very strange thing to see that there's death. You would be expected to live 1,000 years. That has happened before in the Bible. Before the flood, 969-year-old Methuselah, right? We only know the ages of a few people. Many of them could have exceeded 1,000 years. We just don't know, right? We just know the ones that are recorded there. So this is a time period that's going to restore all that with Jesus ruling as king. The last 9 chapters, which I'm not obviously not going to read for sake of time, but the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel all point to a future temple that's going to be rebuilt, right? A temple where there's going to be reinstitution of worship, including sacrifices. Now, a lot of people, that gives them pause. They're a little confused. Why are there sacrifices if Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice? He paid for our sins, right? That's a fair question. It's a valid concern. But also, what a lot of people don't realize is none of the sacrifices in the Old Testament ever paid for sin, yet they were still required. Not a single one of them ever paid for sin. They were done in anticipation of the ultimate sacrifice. It was a picture of what Jesus, a foreshadowing of what Jesus would do for us on the cross. The author of the book of Hebrews, I believe it's Paul, but some people think it's someone else, but the author of Hebrews makes it clear that it was a picture of Christ. In Hebrews chapter 10, verse 3 and 4, it says, but in those sacrifices, there is a remembrance or a anticipation, again, made of sins every year. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and of goats should take away sins. And then if you go down to verse 10 and 8, verse 10, it says, by the which, while we were all sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. And then down to verse 18, now where remission of these is, there is no more offering for sin. So Jesus was the one and only sacrifice for all sin. That means that every offering before the cross, every single one, was symbolic. That also means that every offering that happened after the cross is done in memorial from the Christian point of view. The author of Hebrews clearly understood this, and we can clearly assume the other apostles taught the same. But isn't it interesting that Paul, who's, again, I think wrote Hebrews, but doesn't have to be, who understood that these sacrifices were just pictures, they were still required for the feasts he attended, and he still attended them. They were still required for the vows that he fulfilled, and yet he still made the sacrifice. This is all after Christ. So in Acts chapter 20, verse 6, he says, we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. That's the feast of unleavened bread, which again requires sacrifice. And came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. Down in chapter 20, verse 16, it says, for Paul determined to sail by Ephesus because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted, if it were possible for him, to be in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost, another feast where sacrifice was required. We even know that he calls, or the author of Hebrews talks about Jesus being our Passover. So animals were sacrificed for Passover, or for Pentecost, excuse me, and he talks about Jesus being our Passover. And then during the Pentecost, they would have to sacrifice, I think it was 2 bulls, a number of goats, and a number of sheep. I think it was 7. But these sacrifices continued even for the New Testament Christians. And then finally, whenever he was told to fulfill a vow, in Acts 21, verse 26, it says, then Paul took the men, and the next day, purifying himself with them, entered into the temple to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification until that an offering should be offered for every one of them. So you see, even after Jesus Christ's death on the cross, sacrifices were still performed for the New Testament believers, for the New Testament church. Yet they all understood it was in memorial of what Jesus did. They understood the symbolism of it. Did Paul think that somehow this was washing away his sins again? Clearly not, right? Pentecost required offerings. Feast of Unleavened Bread requires offerings. Nazirite vow requires offerings. All of these. Paul never once tried to claim they were necessary for salvation. They were all pictures of Jesus Christ. That does not make them wrong to do in memorial. And that's during the millennial temple. You're going to see a whole bunch of sacrifices being performed, not for sin, but in remembrance of what Jesus did. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1 says, for the law, having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with those sacrifices which they offered year by year, continually make the comers thereunto perfect. So those sacrifices don't make us perfect. They're just pictures. So in Psalm 72, you see this righteous king, and he brings peace. I'm not going to read all of Psalm 72 for this, but you can read it on your own time. Talks about this righteous king coming and bringing peace and prosperity to the land of Israel that was formerly troubled. In Psalm 110, we see that the enemies of the Messiah become his footstool. Okay. Hosea chapter 3, verse 5 says the children of Israel return and seek their Lord and David their king. Again, symbolic of Jesus. What's that? That's Hosea chapter 3, verse 5. So there are all kinds of passages that we can reference throughout the Old Testament that speak of the millennial kingdom. And it is a clearly understood concept by the early church that Jesus is going to come back and physically reign. We talked about some of those passages before where they kept asking Jesus, are you now going to set up your kingdom? So all these things are clearly thought and understood by the first and early church of the apostles and from there forward. Okay. And finally, we see that when Jesus's birth was announced to Mary, there was a promise that he was going to sit on David's throne. And that is a physical throne in Israel. So Luke chapter 1, verse 32 and 33, speaking to Mary from the angel, he says, he shall be great and shall be called the Son of the Highest. And the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David, and he shall reign over the house of Jacob forever. And of his kingdom there shall be no end. Just curiosity, you guys have all read the Gospels. How many times did Jesus sit on an earthly throne at his first coming that's recorded in the Gospels? Any times? 0, right? So it hasn't happened yet. Does that mean the prophecy is not going to happen? No, it's certainly going to happen. What's that?
I wanted to joke here.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
People said, I want to get outside toilets back there.
Oh, yeah, different kind of throne, though. But the point being, though, Jesus is going to sit on this throne. It was prophesied he would. He has not yet done it. That means it will still happen, right? And he is now sitting at the right hand of God until when? Until his enemies become his footstool, right? That is something he will accomplish at his return. Romans chapter 8, verse 34 says, who is he that condemneth? It is Christ that died, yea, rather, that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, who also maketh intercession for us. There he is waiting, Jesus is waiting there until the earth is his kingdom, just as God promised that it would be. So in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 12 and 13 says, but this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of God. So where's Jesus? At the right hand of God. Why? From henceforth expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. Some people, again, they want to claim that Satan has already been imprisoned. The New Testament tells us he is waiting for the time coming, the time that is yet coming for him to reign on the earth. And don't forget, this is the last thing we'll say. We'll take a 5-minute break. Don't forget when God instructed his disciples to pray, when they came to Jesus and they said, teach us to pray, right? What is the first thing they were told to pray for after blessing the name of God? Does anyone know? What was it? Thy kingdom come. So Luke 11, verse 2 says, and he said unto them, when you pray, say, our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So first give glory to the name of God. Thy kingdom come. Then thy will be done on earth, as in heaven, so in earth. So that's what Revelation 20 is all about. The coming kingdom of God to earth, right? So just like the beginning of the Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done, as it is in heaven, let it so be on the earth. We have not yet seen that on the earth. We will see that on the earth. So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and then we'll start Revelation chapter 20 and get through at least a couple verses to stay.